on.
Yeah, there
Now
you
it's
go.
on.
Yes, now it's on.
Oh, but I think off. Yeah, thank you.
So,
So these are the ones.
Yes, yes, yes.
It sounds like these are preparing.
Oh, that's getting into launch pad. He's
Launch
coming.
pad. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So is there like this kind of sense that it wasn't really right or
Just like just yeah,
But it will be set up for the meeting.
but everything is fine. It's just that
I don't know, I need to be sure.
I don't know. I think she was always going to do it.
go step by step, because the important thing is to have a presentation.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will start in a couple of minutes, so please be seated. Thank you.
Usually someone just walks to the one who raises the hand.
Okay, but there is no problem with the connectivity.
No, no,
very
no,
far.
no problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, because we will need to display. We need to display the presentation, but he needs to know when to display the presentation.
¿Cuáles son los que me enseñármelas?
Son tres. Son
Uno para
tres.
cada uno para ver uno
Perú. No, para Virenda.
para dibujar acá. Y así van en orden. Y así van en orden como las tienen. Ok.
The virtual one. The presentation is in the front. I have nothing to do with it. It has to be done from the front. I don't have access.
Good morning, everyone. We will now start the session. So thank you so much, welcome, and many thanks for joining today's side event on capacity building needs for the implementation of Article 6. My name is Mary Awad Menassa. I'm a Senior Climate Action Specialist at the UNFCCC WGO Regional Collaboration Center for the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, and I will be moderating this event today. The COP26 decisions on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement have highlighted the need to focus on capacity building for Article 6.2 and 6.4, especially when it comes to NDC implementation. As parties submit their updated NDCs, the interest in engaging in Article 6 mechanism has been increasing. A bit of context first. Today's side event follows 3 regional virtual dialogues and a survey organized by the UN Climate Change Secretariat through its regional collaboration centers. These have started capturing parties' Article 6 capacity building needs, and we will share the outcome of these 3 regional dialogues and the survey here with us today. This exercise to shape the UNFCCC work plan for Article 6 capacity building continues today. The COP26 key outcomes, as well as the details on Article 6 and CDM transition, will also be presented to raise awareness on the next steps. What's important for us today is to hear from you and to have a focused and informed capacity building session to have your feedback, since it is key for climate action implementation and eventually achieving the Paris Agreement. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. James Grabert, Mitigation Director at the UNFCCC Secretariat, for his welcoming remarks. James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. So on behalf of the UNFCCC Secretariat, pleased to have you here today, and I'm happy to be opening this side event. Let me start by underlining the achievements we all achieved at COP26. We know we achieved a lot, but it's very clear that the current commitments are still not enough for us to be on track to deliver against what we're aiming for in terms of the 1.5 target. A lot of work still remains to be done. So with the Glasgow Compact adopted, we know the parties have now moved towards negotiation, have moved the negotiation towards a focus on implementation. The agreement on the fundamental rules related to Article 6 was also concluded. The foundation for a credible and global carbon market and non-market approaches that represents important outcome for the Paris Agreement are more or less fully operational. We are, of course, still in the process of negotiating some of the elements, but they are on the run-up to being operational. This critical outcome will give certainty and predictability to both market and non-market approaches that will support both mitigation as well as adaptation. Our 6 regional collaboration centers are supporting the UNFCCC process in the form of capacity building activities through a wide range of awareness raising activities, including communication, outreach, and developing knowledge products. Building on this good relationship the RCCs have, particularly with national focal points, DNAs, and other stakeholders in the regions, and the demonstrated capacities of the RCCs to identify gaps and constraints, the Secretariat, through its RCCs, held 3 regional dialogues coupled with a survey with the aim of collecting your valuable input for the design of a capacity building program on Article 6. These virtual dialogues were organized in Africa, in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in the Asia Pacific and Middle East last month. The dialogues identified and explored capacity building needs, informed on the development of the Article 6 capacity building program of the Secretariat, and provided information to facilitate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So a warm welcome goes to everyone attending here today at this side event. I can say that I believe we had a very significant participation in the dialogues. We had registrations of over 150 national focal points in DNAs, as well as we also managed to have connected for a live stream various stakeholders and development organizations who were involved in providing capacity building. Your participation today is invaluable to this side event, as this is an opportunity for us to enhance the awareness on the COP26 key outcomes and decisions focused on Article 6 and the CDM transition, especially regarding the developing of capacities in countries to participate in Article 6. So I call on everyone here today to collaborate and engage actively in the discussions on our common climate challenge. Once again, let me thank our colleagues at the 6 regional collaboration centers for hosting those dialogues and for their continued support toward Article 6 capacity building. Thank you.
Many thanks, James, for inspiring, welcoming remarks. For the next intervention, we had planned to welcome Mr. Muhammad Fawad Hayat from Pakistan, who will speak in his capacity as Global DNA Forum co-chair from non-Annex 1 countries for 2022. He will be joining us virtually. If you can be a little patient with us to see if we can upload his presentation, and then he will present. Just to mention that Mr. Hayat's function is limited to the scope of the work under CDM, as parties are still discussing governance, function matters related to the DNAs, for example, under Article 6.2. So,
if we can get him on the screen.
It would be great if we can get Mr. Hayat on the screen. Okay, great.
You can do the welcome and you can choose.
Mr. Hayat, can you hear us?
Hi and good afternoon. Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes, very clear. Thank you. Your presentation is now visible. Please, Mr. Hayat, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome for all of you who must have joined there physically and for those who are joining virtually. My intention was to join physically there. I has all the right reasons to be flying to Bonn on Monday, but unfortunately, due to last minute things here in the country, I could not fly out of Islamabad. So I'm joining virtually. A very warm welcome to everybody. I was recently designated as the Global Co-Chair for non-Annex 1 parties. So this is again from the Climate Week, which was held in Dubai. So we're talking about March here. So my responsibility is to represent the non-Annex 1 parties and all the regions within that. Next, please. The presentation today talks about the market and non-market based mechanisms. So Article 6 is what we're going to be talking about today here. So Article 6 at a glance, actually. So it's primarily what is going to be dealing with us is 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. So primarily 3 within the same article. So giving a brief introduction, I'm sure all of you must be aware of this part. Article 6.2 is cooperative approaches through the use of ITMOs, the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. And this covers bilateral actions to reduce or remove the GHG emissions. 6.4 is a new market mechanism, sometimes referred to as Sustainable Development Mechanism. And this is the multilateral market-based mechanism replacing the old CDM. And then Article 6.4, a framework for non-market approaches mechanism. And this addresses non-market international cooperation among governments. So this is primarily what the mandate is all about. Next, please. Very important thing. My presentation is not really long, so I've tried to talk very to the point, very crisp for that matter. So this is why Article 6 is actually needed. I mean, that's the crux of the whole thing. So aim of the Paris Agreement was holding the global temperature increase well below 2 degrees and preferably limit that to 1.5 degrees. We all remember the discussions, the hard negotiations round the clock happening between 1 degree and 2 degrees and then 2 degrees and now preferably the 1.5 mark coming in, and then cost efficient way of reducing emissions. The second was enhance ambition in the NDCs. A lot of countries, including my own country, have submitted the updated NDCs with new targets, more ambitions within that, because obviously until and unless the ambition bar is not raised, we cannot really achieve this target of 1.5 degrees. So ambition level in the NDC is to be enhanced and supported through market mechanisms. So that's where the market mechanisms come into play. A large number of NDCs referred to use the market mechanisms. And then obviously a political balance, cater both market as well as non-market and cooperative approaches, along with robust regulatory measures for the success of Paris Agreement. So what we have here is the NDCs, transparency, market and non-market mechanisms, the ambition level, reporting in its true form, then obviously the global stock taking, facilitative mechanisms, and global stocking taking for that matter. So the Paris Agreement basically keeps up and attention towards why the Article 6 is absolutely needed and why we're talking about here. And we just have less than about 10 years. So in order for this implementation to go ahead, otherwise it will be too late. Next, please. Okay, so talking about from Kyoto to Paris, success and lessons learned from the CDM. That's very important. We need to learn our lessons from what has happened in CDM and then moving on. And then obviously the CERs will be talking about, So Article 6, 12, 17 of the Kyoto Protocol established the global carbon market. So that's when it all started. It's been 25 years now. CDM established the rules and methodologies for GHG emission reduction, quantification, and baselines and protocols for monitoring and verification. And then emissions trading systems facilitated the trading of carbon credits and established the billion-dollar global carbon market. And success of CDM shows the huge potential for Article 6 in contributing to the target of Paris Agreement. The graphics actually depict what has been happening over the years and the potential supply for CERs. Next, please. Can Article 6 delivered as expected? I think a very important question, especially for the people in the room today, to have a proper discussion on this one. I mean, collectively covers the approaches for mutual cooperation through transfer of ITMOs, market mechanism, as well as non-market mechanism. Market mechanisms are complementary measures that help achieve climate change mitigation targets at the lowest possible cost. And then market mechanisms incentivize entrepreneurship to develop mitigation actions and allow participating entities to internalize the cost of their emissions through carbon credits. Non-market mechanisms support and promote cooperation among parties. What does it mean to us in monetary terms? What we call monetization of these terms. So Article 6 has the potential. Its potential to reduce the total cost of implementing NDCs by more than half by 2030. And we're talking to a tune of 250 billion USD. That's a lot of money. Or facilitate the removal of 50% more emissions. The numbers by 2030, they are a great number for that matter, at no additional cost. So either of the two things, whichever gets done, is a big number, is a big expectation for us, and a big opportunity for us to discuss and to move forward and to implement the same. Next, please. Okay, so COP26 outcomes. Article 6.2, corporate in the previous one and what discussions can happen during the current week and the next one. So, Article 6.2, robust and clear rules for GHG accounting and cross-border transactions through ITMOs. Risks for double counting addressed through the corresponding adjustment mechanism, ITMOs to be adjusted in GHG inventories. ITMOs include both Article 6.2 and 6.4 units, including from voluntary and other carbon reduction regimes, where and CARCIA, scope expansion, obviously. And then clear linkages and calls for enhancing the transparency framework. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Article 6.4, market mechanisms. An international market mechanism governed by a centralized supervisory body, like CDM, but still supervisory body. Stringent accounting rules for baseline setting, additionality below BAU aligned and long-term goals, sets out criteria for countries to use CERs from projects registered after January 1, 2013 to meet their first NDC or first adjusted NDC with no corresponding adjustment. 2% cancellation of Article 6.4 credits at cancellation as overall mitigation goal of emissions. And 5% share of proceeds for adaptation purposes, adaptation fund. Next, please. And finally, Article 6.8, non-market mechanisms, not final rule book, but a work program adopted in Glasgow. Voluntary cooperative actions that are not reliant on market-based approaches and that do not include transactions or quid pro quo operations. Integrated, innovative, and transformational actions that have significant potential to deliver high mitigation and adaptation ambitions. Actions that support the implementation of NDCs of parties hosting NMAs, herein referred to as host parties, and contribute towards the long-term temperature goal of Paris Agreement. So just giving you a little crisp of 6.24 and 8 for broader discussion in the room. Next, please. Thank you so much, and happy to answer questions, discussions. The floor is all yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayat, for your time and intervention as DNA Forum co-chair here with us today, especially on why Article 6 is needed and lessons learned from the CDM. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Perumal Arumugam, team lead at the UN Climate Change Secretariat Mitigation Division, to provide a debrief on the COP26 Article 6 outcomes. Please note that there will be time after Perumal's presentations for questions and answers. Perumal, you have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, friends and colleagues. They're quite a familiar faces. So for some of you, it might be that you are well aware of what has been achieved in COP26 in relation to Article 6, the Paris Agreement, and I'm also thankful to Fawad to also cover some of the elements that I need to cover, he has covered. So I was wondering that how I would be covering in 10 minutes all the aspects that I need to cover. I think on a broader aspect of what Article 6 is, etc., that I also put in my slide. So I would, if you could go to the next slide. It's just a different illustration, but it's pretty much what Fawad has said on, because oftentimes when we talk in terms of Article 6, we are talking about 3 instruments, and we have to be clear in terms of the objective of what Article 6 is for. It's a voluntary cooperation that's available for parties to engage, and then both to implement NDCs and for allow for higher ambition in both mitigation and adaptation. So it's quite broad, and it's voluntary in nature for one to engage. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, so it had like basically 3 elements, 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8, what they are, and some examples of what 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8 means has already been covered by Fawad. So I would basically say the key elements of what has been decided in Article 6.2 and 6.4 in the couple of slides later. So the first one, people who have followed the negotiations on Article 6 in Madrid might have recognized that the reason for, one of the major reasons that the outcome on Article 6 was not possible was in relation to how does the adaptation contribution would come from Article 6.2 type of cooperation. So what parties have decided in Glasgow, there would be a strong encouragement for parties to commit to contribute to the resource of the adaptation. And then they also have made a decision of the channel through which that it could be funded, and as that through as an adaptation fund. And then they also have said something similar to the Article 6.4, and parties, it's all voluntary, but also one of the shall requirements is to report them on any contributions that is being made. So that's how the 6.2 was landed in terms of its contribution towards the adaptation as well as for the ambition related to mitigation. So here you will hear some terms about overall mitigation of global emissions in 6.4. So that aspect is also voluntary in case of Article 6.2. The 6.2 guidance is about 15 pages, and I try to put them in 5 bullet points of what it broadly covers. So it basically elaborates the requirements to participate in the cooperative approach in terms of the various participation requirements we have to meet, that I would take in one slide, because that's one of the focus areas the parties have identified in Glasgow as a priority area to offer the capacity building by the Secretariat through the RCCs in consultation with parties. And then, sorry. Then the second aspect is that the guidance also says that can any mitigation outcome, when they are transferred internationally, can it be called as an ITMO? So the guidance elaborates kind of a description on the quality of the mitigation outcomes that you need to generate, covering various aspects related to what vintage is eligible as an ITMO, the description of them being real, verifiable, additional, etc. So you have descriptions around what an ITMO means. And then we all know that under the NDCs, we have diverse types of NDCs, and no one should be left behind. So the parties were negotiating very hard in accommodating all types of NDCs. So the guidance then elaborates on the issues related to different accounting when it is if you have a different target year, if you have different types of NDCs, how to account them, etc. Then the guidelines or the guidance also elaborates in relation to what and how and when to report the information, and what, how and when to review such information, and what infrastructure is required in order for them to offer the credibility that is needed when you operate in market. There are 3 different types of infrastructure that has been looked at. The 6.4 registry, 6.2. As under the 6.2, you have the registry, you have the database, and you have the CARP. And then pretty much, I would say that under Article 6.2, you have the elements related to these which has been decided in Glasgow. Then if we get into 6.4, you often might have heard around the conversations that we are in the time of implementation at this moment, and we have moved and we have achieved everything in the Paris Agreement in order for them to be implemented. So the last fork on the wheel which was stopping them to be rolled on the road was Article 6. And our parties were able to make decisions in Glasgow. And one of the things within Article 6.4 that was very much negotiated is in terms of to the use of the pre-2020 credits towards the post-2020 NDCs. So here there were 2 decisions taken, one in terms of vintage and the other one in terms of the time frame, which when I use the term, it's very familiar to someone who are following the IKO process in terms of vintage and time frame. So under the Article 6.4, the vintage that is being decided is that oftentimes people confuse between the vintage of eligibility of an activity to transition to that of the units that could transition. So when it comes to an activity transition, any CDM activity can transition. There is no vintage restrictions as long as they fulfill the requirements of the rules, modalities, and procedures of the 6.4. Whereas if it is about the units that are coming from the clean development mechanism, then you have a vintage restriction that they have to be an activity that is registered on or after 1st January 2013, and the time frame to be used is within the first updated NDC. So in the negotiation, it started from everything being eligible to nothing is eligible, and that was the middle ground that parties have identified with limited transition that is possible to be accommodated. If you go to the next slide, please. I think Fawad already spoke in terms of the decisions in 6.4 related to adaptation finance. So in contrast to what we have experienced in the previous mechanism, now we have 3 channels of financing towards adaptation from the centralized Article 6.4 mechanism. So one is in kind, which is 5% that is being decided already. Then a monetary level. Many of you, I could see some familiar faces who were former members of the Adaptation Fund board. So wherein you still have certain credits that is in the Adaptation Fund, but you could not monetize because of the circumstances in the market. So when parties were discussing or when they were finalizing the outcomes in Glasgow, they also wanted to look for opportunities where there could be some kind of a monetary contribution so that everything is not dependent on the price fluctuations in the market. So in order to provide that, level of adaptation fund with a certainty, there was a monetary level which needs to be decided, but that would be the second channel of adaptation finance that would be going from the centralized mechanism. And the third one was there would be an adaptation levy to participate in the mechanism, and anything in excess to the operation of that mechanism in a desired interval needs to be provided again to the adaptation finance. So those are the 3 channels for financing. Then in terms of overall mitigation in global emissions, there was a 2% cancellation towards OMGE. And then in terms of the non-GHG, like it was a mix with 6.2, so you can have non-GHG as well. But when you engage with them, you need to follow the guidelines within 6.2. And then there was a significant change within the 6.4 rules related to baseline and additionality. The baselines need to be ambitious with numerous guiding principles and rules focused on best available technology. So you have now one approach with 3 methods to address those approach. Like in the former mechanism, you had 3 approaches. Now you have one approach, which is the performance-based approach. So if you have we already have decisions to look at the CDM methodologies, etc. So one has to see that how they align with the new decision that is being taken with respect to the baseline principles. Then in terms of additionality, in the CDM, in the KP mechanism, where you, for certain types of activities, you had the flexibility of looking at the enforcement rates, even if you have a legislation or regulation that exists. Whereas in the new 6.4 mechanism, that the additionality has to be always a regulatory surplus. And then in terms of activity transition, which I have already specified, so I would go to the next slide. Compared to, again, KP mechanism, the scope of the Article 6 activities are much broader compared to what we have been experienced before, because the decision says that all emission reductions and removal activities are eligible under Article 6, provided if they meet the relevant requirements, either in the guidance or in the modalities and procedures. So this is just a representation that it can come from all sectors, including NBS, for example, as long as that they fit the requirements. Then in removals, it could be technology-based removals or natural sinks that's eligible. Then it gives a question that whether or not that adaptation measures would be eligible. So if there's a mitigation co-benefit that is arising from an adaptation action, that can also be eligible under Article 6. So that's the broad scope of coverage of activity under Article 6. If you go to the next slide, I would just skip that because I think Fawad has already said about Article 6.8 and its outcomes. So under 6.8, it's for non-market-based approaches, where you have a Glasgow Committee on Non-Market-Based Approaches being established. It will have its first meeting tomorrow. They had a workshop yesterday, and the focus areas and modalities and activities is what is being decided. If you go to the next slide, one before this. Yeah, I think like Fawad has also mentioned that all in Article 6 is not yet done. So this basically, on the upper end, you would see the timeline of activities for Article 6 completion of work in 2022. So the green ones are related to 6.2, wherein there was a submission deadline on issues related to reporting and infrastructure. And then there was a workshop that was conducted in May. And currently we are having an in-session work that is happening under Article 6.2. When it comes to 6.4, there were no intersessional work between Glasgow until Bonn. So the first sessions the first meetings have started in this session, and 2 hours of session was concluded on 6.4, and the work will continue this week. In the meantime, for Article 6.4, like in contrast to Article 6.2, for 6.4, many of the activities were also being delegated to the supervisory body to deliver. And hopefully that when we have the full board, full supervisory body in place, they would meet in the second half of the year to deliver the outcomes that needs to be delivered in Glasgow. The lower part is about the 6.8 work, that timeline around in 2022. So we had a submission deadline. We received about 24 submissions. There was a synthesis of the submission being published by the Secretariat. And then we had an in-session workshop yesterday, and the GCNMA first meeting would happen tomorrow. The report from the workshop will be prepared and will be submitted to the Glasgow Committee on Non-Market-Based Approaches in its second meeting. So within Article 6.2, there are about 6 areas that needs to be worked on, and within Article 6.8, there are about 8 areas that the substa needs to deliver, in addition to the things that the supervisory body has to deliver once it starts functioning for the for the consideration of the CMA. If you go to the next slide. This is the institutional arrangements that was being decided by parties to participate in Article 6.4. So it has to be a party to the Paris Agreement. It has to maintain its NDC. It has a DNA for the mechanism. For many countries that I think already it is in the stage of the Gazette notification. For some, it is in the preparation. For some, they are already ready to communicate to the Secretariat in terms of putting towards their designated national authority with respect to 6.4. Then the national arrangements also has to indicate publicly to the 6.4 supervisory body how its participation in the mechanism contributes to the sustainable development, while also acknowledging that the consideration of SD is a national prerogative. And also it has indicated publicly to the 6.4 supervisory body the types of Article 6.4 activities that would consider approving, basically approval and authorization, where applicable, how such type of activities or any associated emission reductions would contribute towards the LT-LEDs, long-term goals, and NDCs, etc. Then there are about May requirements. This is new additional responsibility also being offered to the host parties. They can choose among the different baseline approaches, or within one approach, different methods they can choose, or they can come with an alternative approach. And also they can limit the length of the crediting periods. Then when it comes to 6.2, it's pretty much overlays with what we have in 6.4. It has a national arrangement with respect to authorization and tracking of ITMOs towards achievement of NDC, and also its participation towards NDC-LEDs and the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, I made this slide, but I think you can have literally the roles of the host party is also determining. You can authorize. It's kind of writing a project business proposal that a host country can decide what it wanted to authorize. And when it is authorized, it has multiple uses. And when it is non-authorized, it has a limited use. But the country can decide on for what purposes that it wanted to authorize, and if it authorizes, then it has to undertake the accounting. So that's the decision that has been taken. The next slide. So this is in relation to the capacity building, and I think before my colleagues come later on capacity building, I think this is the mandate for all of us to remember. The Article 6.2 capacity building has been delegated to the Secretariat to undertake capacity building program through RCCs in consultation with parties. Under Article 6.2, the elements that have been identified are the support and development of institutional arrangements, including reporting, how the participation in Article 6 supports ambition, how it assists LDCs and also assists in LDCs and sits in meeting the relevant participation requirements. Within 6.4, again, it's about institutional arrangements and the technical capacity related to the baselines. Then within the CMP, there was a mandate also to work related to capacity building, but that was related to the transition of activities. That's the decision from the CMP. The last slide, last but one. I think again, Fawad has covered a bit on in terms of the economic opportunity of engaging in Article 6 cooperation, without saying whether it's 6.2, 6.4, or 6.8. It's if you engage in Article 6, the economic opportunities around why does this matter, and it's a toolbox where it engages directly the business and private sector for an implementable activity. So we do have a lot of work to complete now in Bonn as well as in Sharm el-Sheikh, and probably even moving forward. They are quite ambitious, as I said, that 6 sub-elements within Article 6.2 and 8 sub-elements within 6.4 needs to be concluded. And parties would be working hard now in this session and also in between this session and the next session in order for us to achieve an outcome. In the last slide, you will find more than 60% of the people on this slide in this room. So that was the happy outcome from Glasgow, which we use in every slide for the hard work that you all have done for not only for 6 years, I think even before Paris, to have them to have a successful outcome and to start with the capacity building exercise. Thanks. So I would open the floor for a Q&A before my colleagues come on the capacity building element specifically, or update on the capacity building aspects. Thanks.
There's someone requesting the floor. So colleagues, we encourage you to ask questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for your presentations. It's just brainstorming on where we are right now. But in terms of the really expectation from this meeting, I think I was a bit ambitious in terms of really getting an insight, deep insight into how we should move with the capacity building aspect of it. Regarding using the regional centers, what's needed, the methodology that we are going to follow, the approach and the mode of work, all these things need to start because, as you have already referred in the presentation, there's a decision for the Secretariat to start the capacity building. I mean, there was no specific time limit, and it's open-ended, but we need to get into it right now. So I'm expecting Secretariat to move faster and just show us your thinking on how you are, the mode of work, what to be done, on which region, or whatever approach you are thinking to realize. So I'm still looking for that, but I couldn't get it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gebru, for your inputs. And I think exactly that will be something that my colleagues who will be, your point is well noted, and that I think in the initial introduction, I think our colleagues have updated on the process that has been done by the Secretariat so far in terms of holding regional dialogues through the RCCs in 3 different regions, conducting a survey in terms of assessment of needs through a survey questionnaire being sent through the national focal points and the DNAs to collect information on the requirements related to capacity building and the outcomes and the future processes. I think the subsequent session would be elaborating a bit more and also to hear from you on what are your expectations. And I think there's also one session where we would be eagerly waiting to hear from you as well on what do you think that needs to be done. I know you cover a major group which is also has a specific mandate to assist the LDCs in terms of participating in the Article 6 instruments. Thanks, Gebru. Are there any questions? I'm too short to find anything from here.
Colleagues, if you can please raise your hand if you have any questions, and please introduce yourself. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Öykü. Thanks for the presentations again. So you mentioned about the success of the CDM and the lessons learned, of course, the importance of lessons learned for Article 6 mechanisms as well. But I think it's very important also to focus on the drawbacks of the CDM and the disadvantages. So my question is, like, what would you name as the 3 or 4 major drawbacks of the CDM? That could also affect the Article 6 mechanisms. But of course, if you don't want to answer it right now, maybe I also think that the capacity building aspect of Article 6 should also focus on the drawbacks of the CDM as well as the advantages of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Secretary, for this introduction on Article 6. I will just invite colleagues to move forward on the capacity building issue because it's very important for us and we don't have enough time. Maybe some question can be taken after, but we need to make progress on this capacity building program. Thank you.
Perumal, would you answer?
No, I think yeah, when it says that you need to take into the lessons from the CDM, it's both positives and negatives, and would be later I will touch base with you on to understand what you feel are the negative aspects. I think there's one question at the back, and then I think probably we can move to the next session as all of them eagerly waiting to listen to the outcomes from the survey. One from Sudan and one from Palau. Okay, the Sudan then.
Okay, thank you very much for this very useful presentation. And thank you to focusing this very important issue to capacity building. I'm adding to this RCC well done to capacity building program and add to university and research center, maybe an initiative, for example, alliance here in Africa, 2 alliance here in Africa to be start 2019. Have capacity our Article 6 and marketing. Maybe this windows to be push the capacity building in the area. We need to add here in the university and research center and the initiative for this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your input.
Thank you. Maybe we can take one more question. If not, colleagues, you will have the opportunity to provide feedback in a few minutes after the Carlos presentation. So we were definitely eager to hear from you. Thanks everyone for your engagement, and thank you, Perumal, also. So moving forward to present the outcomes of the 3 regional dialogues and also the survey, which their objective was to collect feedback on the capacity building needs related to Article 6 from the different regions. I would now like to hand over to Mr. Carlos Ruiz Garvilla, RCC St. George's Regional Lead and Officer for the Global Innovation Hub. Carlos, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. And good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As mentioned, I will be presenting the outcomes of the 3 regional dialogues and survey that was conducted before this event. I will do that on behalf of my colleagues from the Regional Collaboration Centers. It's a network of 6 RCCs located in all regions in Global South. So my presentation will cover 2 parts. The first one is the report of the 3 regional dialogues that were conducted via virtual means between the 10th and 12th of May this year by all the RCCs. And the second part of the presentation is the report of the initial survey that we conducted to gather information and feedback on capacity building needs from various actors. So again, the purpose of this presentation is to present some of the preliminary results of these activities with the aim to, at the next session, to open the floor to feed into the ideas and collection of feedback that will help us to draft the program. As a background information of this work, my colleague Perumal was already presenting. This is coming from a mandate from Glasgow, where parties requested the Secretariat to design and following consultation with the parties, implement a capacity building program through its regional collaboration centers to assist parties, particularly in developing and implementing activities connected to capacity building for developing countries. In addition to this, the CMA, as you have here before, requested the Secretariat, including to its regional collaboration centers, and in consultation with the supervisory body, to design and implement, in consultation again with the parties, a capacity building program to assist parties wishing to voluntarily participate in the mechanism. So this is the background, and this exercise today is part on the means to address the same. With this said, the objective of the dialogues, I will be now presenting the regional dialogues. The objectives were to explore and learn more about these capacity building needs and inform about the development of the capacity building work plan program that is proposed by the Secretariat, and provided also information to facilitate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. The target participants that were invited to the 3 regional dialogues include the UNFCCC national focal points from the regions, the CDM designated national authorities from Global South, and also included the formal RCC partners that were part of the virtual event. So this gives you a little bit of a flavor on the timeline arrangements. We have the first one conducted on the 10th of May for Africa, these last 2 hours, and this was then replicated and tailored to the regions that you see on the screen. On 11 May, we have the event for Latin America and the Caribbean, and on 12, we conduct the same for Asia Pacific and the Middle East. And again, these were supported by our regional collaboration centers. In this part, I will be presenting some of the main key messages that were identified from these dialogues. So I won't be exhausted, but I will just give you some highlights of the key messages. In the case of Africa, parties express that the capacity needs shall include authorization of ITMOs, matters related to that. They also flag the need to further understand the circumstances of LDCs and seats. Managing corresponding adjustment was also one of the priority points for the participants from Africa, setting baselines and work on robust reporting. In addition to this bunch, we also look into other elements. They provided feedback requesting the Secretariat to develop a blueprint document or a framework document that will detail the steps of the implementation of the processes connected to Article 6.2, 6.4, but also included elements on 6.8. The parties were requesting as well additional support in communicating to the private sector, liaising with them to also make them be part of the carbon markets under Article 6, and to help to rebuild trust with the private sector. And finally, a limited budget calls for innovative approach to ensure that the governments can enable private sector participation without causing extra cost to itself. So these were the key messages from Africa. I moved to Latin America and the Caribbean. For the region, what it was important was to understand the linkages between Article 6 and the carbon pricing instruments. They also requested to receive support for development and implementation of legal institutional arrangements, including reporting. They indicated that due to the connection between Article 6 with the NDCs, it makes impossible to have information in the long-term trajectory and how it will look like, and they requested the Secretariat to support them in creating capacities for modeling the impacts and the benefits of Article 6 implementation in their NDCs, but on their long-term strategies. They also mention, in connection to Article 6.8, a common doubt remains whether these certain mechanisms like RED Plus, how they interact with Article 6.8, and countries are looking forward to also understand these 6.8 rules regarding the result-based payment. So a capacity building on that regard on how this is negotiated and the next steps of the consideration by parties, that will be extremely helpful. They also touch base on adaptation finance. They also ask questions around including adaptation finance under Article 6.8 without involving the transfer of mitigation outcomes. So this was one of the other points that were flagged by parties presented or present at the dialogues in Latin America and the Caribbean. And finally, the workshop activities with case solving that will help them to understand the institutional arrangements that are needed, but also how these arrangements will be fit for purpose for the region. I move to the last region, so this is Asia Pacific and MENA. And here they express that alignment of national mitigation activity is important. They also connect this to environment integrity and sustainable development requirements under Article 6. They express the need to include elements connecting to assessing required improvements to national registry for tracking ITMOs in accordance with the guidelines and the guidance for registries that will be adopted at CMA 4 and for providing the necessary information on the annual reporting cycles. They also flag that developing baseline approaches could be priorities and other methodological requirements to be applied under 6.4, and developing national arrangements for accreditation of operational entities such as verifiers, DOEs for Article 6.4. It's important not only providing capacity building activities to a governmental agency, but also open it up to, of course, the private sector that is connected to the verifiers. And finally, transition from the CDM to the Article 6.4 elements. This was deemed to be very important, but in this time involving and engaging with the private sector so that we have a broader participation of the private sector under Article 6.4. This part of the presentation is connected to the parallel exercise that we conducted in parallel to the dialogues, and this is an open survey that was conducted using a tool, SurveyMonkey tool, and what I will do is I will present some of the key findings of the information that was collected. Just to give a flavor of the participants in this survey, we received feedback from around 60 countries from Global South. 101 answers were collected during the period between the 2nd of May to the 20th of May, though the survey remains open so that we continue collecting this feedback. By the time of preparing this presentation, we have a participation of about 75% of the participants coming from government, so they were part of the focal point network. And you can see also the participation across regions. So we have large participation from Asia and Pacific, from Latin America and the Caribbean combined, but also to a large extent from East Africa and some feedback from Central Africa. We provided a matrix so that participants in the survey could select which one they felt were priorities. This is in a nutshell the feedback received. So for participants, the main priorities are around 6.2, supporting parties on the development of institutional arrangements, including reporting, They also have the participation in the cooperative approach and the authorization, transfer, and use of ITMOS, and the guidance on cooperative approaches and relevant decisions. This is connected to the priorities and 6.2, were the top two, and followed by Article 6.4, develop the technical capacity to design and set baselines for application in host parties. These elements were followed by general outcomes of the COP decisions, keeping them abreast of the upcoming also decisions from, of course, the outcomes of SB 56, but also COP27. And finally, helping countries ensure that cooperative approaches in which they participate support ambition. In terms of the suggested periodicity of the capacity building activities, the format of the capacity building programs, they express preference for continuously using a web-based learning platform. They suggested to conduct activities twice a year and in person and at the margins of regional events such as climate weeks were also preferred. And then you see other options like once a year or other suggestions that were provided via free text. So this, in a nutshell, gives you the flavor of the initial responses. We will provide, of course, these slides through our dedicated sites. The RCCs will be active as well, sharing these outcomes through their newsletters, and these will be used and serve as a major input in the ongoing process of developing of a capacity building work program on Article 6 by the Secretariat. So this is a source of information that will fill into this process, and in addition to this, we will have the next session. We will be collecting feedback from you, and that is the next agenda item. So with this, I pass the mic to you, Mari. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for sharing the inputs of the dialogues and the survey, and for also setting the stage for the discussion. So I would now like to hand over to Mr. Dehendra Kumar and Mr. Gajanana Hedge, Team Leaders, Regulatory Framework Implementation at the UNFCCC Mitigation Division, to moderate a facilitated session with you today, focusing on two questions which will now be posted on the screen. The questions will focus on the what and the how. So what are the needs, priorities, challenges in the context of Article 6 implementation, and also the ways to conduct the capacity building. So Dehendra and Gaj, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon to all the participants and the colleagues and the friends. Now, coming to the last session of this side event, that till now what we have seen is the Article 6 decisions in summary and brief summary of the 3 regional dialogues, and at the same time the survey which we have launched. The aim of these 3 regional dialogues and the survey was basically we were gathering input when developing the work program for Article 6 capacity building activities. So with this regard, now basically we would like to seek your feedback or the inputs on the 2 aspects that will help us to develop a better and well-uniformed the work program for Article 6 capacity building. And the 2 questions what we have is on the screen. So basically our intention is that already you have given your inputs through the Survey Monkey and at the same time through your participation and inputs through the 3 regional dialogues. So on the top of that, what exactly is your need, priorities and challenges in the context of Article 6 implementation? What you view is something more can be added on this aspect. And that should be in addition to your inputs on the regional dialogues and the survey findings. And at the same time, we also like to listen your view, then what is the priorities? So we may identify 10 or 20 areas of capacity building. Then if we talk about the 2-year work program, what is the priority area for year 1? What could be the priority area for year 2? Some elements can wait for some time, but there are certain elements in the capacity building that need to be done immediately and the work need to start immediately. So if you can help us to identify the priority areas and at the same time immediate priority area or the long-term priority area. The second question is what we have is how to conduct the capacity program. Basically what we are looking for is the products, process, events, priorities and addition of that should be in addition to the regional dialogues and the survey. So I think it's better not to jump on the two aspects at one time. So maybe we can collect your feedback on the first question on what, and then we will move to the second question on how. Thank you. The floor is open. I think it's Bay.
Thank you, Secretariat. I'm Bai from the African Group, and thank you for your presentation. If you remember, we pushed for having this very robust capacity building program based on the experience we had under the CDM. Many developing countries didn't participate in this mechanism. We just jump in at the last 10 years when the price fall down. So it's why we consider that it is one of the most important aspects of the decision we have taken in Glasgow in embedding this specific capacity building program in the decision in Glasgow. And if I can recall that, the mandate for the Secretariat is very clear. You have to build this capacity building program to develop it and implement it. And we expect to have these two mechanisms, the 6.2 as well as the 6.4, to be operational as soon as possible, and we expect to have it next year, so that we have very short time to develop and implement this capacity building program. And what I can, based on the presentation made, my view is to take the capacity building program in a different way than what is already ongoing. Instead of having these dialogues, the survey that is very important and highlighted very interesting needs from stakeholders in different countries. I think we have already in the current text the participation responsibility that are clearly identified. That party that wanted to participate in Article 6 need to meet. We also have clearly developed the additional responsibility of different countries based on what we had on the CDM. The baseline, this relationship between the NDC and the activities and many others clearly defined that any party that wanted to participate in Article 6 need to meet. We also have taken some decisions when it comes to the CDM transition. Based on those factual elements that are in the decision, I think we can move forward. And considering this survey as well as the dialogue to supplement those elements. If we want to move very quickly, we need to build the capacity building program based on those factual issues and facts that have already been defined, and that any country that wanted to participate in Article 6 need to meet. So we can develop and start with that. And all this survey, as well as this dialogue, can supplement those elements. That if we want at the end of the year to get something, I think that are the way I propose to work on. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm Gabruf, representing the LDC group of negotiators. Thank you. Just to respond to the first question on the priorities, it's good you start with the regional groups in the consultations, and good to complement through this process as well. And if you blend the needs from different regions, I think you will have all a comprehensive need. But as you know, countries are in different stages of engagement. Some countries may have prior experience engaging with the CDM, but other countries, like most LDC and SIDS, they haven't been really to that. So that means they don't have really the right infrastructure in place. So picking a few things may not be the best option. You know what's needed across the value chain for countries to be engaged in this process. So if we have a basket of solutions being prepared, as per the need, you can prioritize. So I think we need to go beyond really specifically mentioning a few intervention areas. So let's know what's needed from A to Z for countries to be better engaged in the process. It may be just software or hardware, whatever. So from that perspective, you better have a basket of solutions, which could be, all countries may not need all the package, but it's good to have that. If that's the case, I think it could fit for any party. And on the how part, I think once you have the product this way, in terms of process, I think these workshops, I don't think that will be the right way of really building capacity. This business as usual of doing workshops, not sustainable. If we want to have sustainable impact and parties engaged in this process, we need to do the other way. I think through the regional consultations, think of clustering countries into different regions and sub-regions. And then make use of existing universities and research centers to be regional hubs so that at any point in time, they can make use of that facility. And also we need to look for interlinkage for the infrastructure for the transparency framework, because the RCCs infrastructure will not be a standalone. It needs to have interlinkage with it. So I think it's a good start, but think of really having a comprehensive, horizontally integrated, covering other issues and in a different way of realizing. And in terms of timing, I think 2 years may not be enough because we'll learn through the process. Think something bigger like 5 years, for instance. So that the first thing is just, we'll not do all enablers at the same time. Some may be prioritized to be done the first year, others will follow. So that way of really natural way of flow of really capacity development could be the right option. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Orlando Garner from Honduras. Thank you for this opportunity. I think in my country, for Honduras, it's a lot of demand from people that want to know when Article 6 will start. And especially for these people that have been involved in voluntary market. So they want to know from the authorities when this new Article 6 will be implemented. For that, it's very important that authorities understand very well how this is managed. I read, for example, that somebody mentioned case studies. I think that is a good way to go, especially if I believe to use a hypothetical case study that is common to all parts, so we can learn how to apply this Article 6 and understand what is needed from the different parts that are going to involve in this Article 6 implementation. The regional dialogues, I believe, are good, especially using the RCC. I think we can do a lot of, but I think if we are to do this workshop where all the people will participate, are involved, and will talk about their needs and what they will require, I think we will have a better feedback if we interact with each other. So that is for my side. Thank you.
Colleagues, we're trying to organize the inputs. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Bianca on behalf of Kenya. So I'll be addressing both the what and how and referring directly to the mandates that Perumal had put up regarding what the Secretariat and the RCCs have been mandated to do. So referring to the first one in supporting the development of institutional arrangements, including relation to reporting, we believe that the capacity building program should develop a thorough technical training program and not one-off workshops that will ensure the institutional capacity for the long term. This will ensure deep understanding and knowledge on the requirements, for example, for authorization, applying corresponding adjustments and reporting to ensure institutional responsibilities are undertaken well and effectively in the implementation of Article 6. The training program should be highly focused on young professionals and be very hands-on. And further to this training program, we request that the development of an operating manual be done to support this capacity building and to ensure effective handover to factor in staff turnover and onboarding newcomers. This will ensure the sustainability and continuity of the institutional capacity over time. And a basic training program on carbon markets should be developed for host parties to build capacity for other carbon market players, as seen in the survey, extending to private sector, but we also see it extending to civil society organizations as well. So in regard to ensuring that the cooperative approaches in which host parties participate support ambition, so Kenya's updated NDC leads to an increase of ambition by reducing GHG emissions from 30% in the previous one to now 32% in relation to the business as usual scenario. And what is required to ensure that the NDC remains ambitious is a comprehensive analysis of the NDC to make sure Article 6 activities do not lead to the transfer of mitigation outcomes beyond the agreed NDC target. We request that this analysis should also cover the effects of other international mitigation purposes. And this is an important prerequisite to avoid risky authorization of cooperative approaches that would interfere with ambition. And lastly, for the mechanism under Article 6.4, of course, there's also the establishment of necessary institutional arrangements. So for this, these needs for capacity building program to support these institutional arrangements needs to be done to enable the host parties to clearly communicate conditions for transition to the project developers within this period, the transition period till 2023. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If we can please give the mic to Mr. Martin Hessen next. Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you, and perhaps a slightly different perspective, Martin Heschen from the EU. First of all, it's really interesting to see this process and really important that we listen to the needs of those that have needs and structure the program appropriately. But I've got a couple of questions in the sense that we know that there are two separate capacity building programs in a sense, one for 6.2 and one for 6.4. One has already got some funding as a result of the decisions, and another, I think there's an invitation for contributions to that program. So I'm just interested in how the consultation will be broadened. Is there a plan to put together a program so that potential donors will understand exactly what it is that they're meant to do, particularly under 6.2, because that's important. And for ourselves, we've been talking to various parties about how we. Okay. Sorry. Take the mask off, but I don't know what to do. Okay. Basically, all of the needs input is really valuable, and we need to listen to that. But I've got a kind of a donor question, noting that one program is not completely funded. And I would like to know what the plans are in terms of presentation to other parties, because we've done a survey of those with needs. Indeed, there may be other groups that have needs that have not been surveyed. That's one point, but also just for the potential donor community to understand what the process forward is, particularly for 6.2, given that there isn't funding there, but also for 6.4. And then also to say, for ourselves, we've been consulting with parties and are interested in this issue of the authorization and the adjustment and the hesitation over that. And we're trying to put together a relatively small program to assist countries and do the sorts of assessments that they need to do before making that choice. So a kind of an integrated assessment model for emissions, costs, proposed activities, etc. And we can offer some background on that. But the main question is further consultation with parties in respect of implementation. What are the plans?
Thank you so much. James, please. Thanks.
I'll answer really quickly because I do want to get back to the questions. Thank you, Martin, for the question. So what the Secretariat is in the process of doing, as you can see, we've taken a broad approach. Let's hear what everyone has to say about Article 6, but you're absolutely right. The funding has been provided to assist in providing the capacity of 6.4, 6.2. We have been reaching out to governments in general, noting that there is funding needs for 6.2, part of which would help fund capacity building. Also, at the Secretariat, I'm involved in discussions with a number of donor countries. I'd be happy to speak with you as well offline, Martin, around these areas of general funding for the areas of 6.2 and 6. And including capacity building. In addition, I'll just share with you as well, I'm also in conversation with numerous UN entities and development partners who are, as we all know, are also doing things already or have plans to do things. So we're going to try to facilitate that, coordinate that, to make sure we're using an optimal approach in terms of the things that are happening that can be done elsewhere, and we're ensuring that it's done in a proper way. We would be more than happy to have that happen. So I'm also doing that. And hopefully the plan is by Sharm el-Sheikh to be able to give you the overview of all these things, including the activities we've already been able to move forward on, as I've heard very clearly from some of you, some things we already can do and need to be done. So I hope that addresses your question, Martin.
Can you please give the floor to Japan next? Thank you so much.
Adriana from the delegation of Colombia. I would like to stress two things. The first one, for the first question, I believe we already have the results. It is better to prioritize. There are too many areas, and if we start asking about what other areas we have, then we won't get to any point. But I did see in some of the presentations something that caught my attention, and it was the engagement with private sector. I have seen that there are many workshops that are being organized by private sector to private sector. So maybe it could be really useful if there is a workshop for private sector explaining Article 6 from the Secretariat. So a more public sector view on the topic. And for the second one, additional to possible workshops or case-to-case strategies and other examples that my colleagues have already mentioned, I believe that having a roster of experts that we as parties can go to and consult to can also build capacity, so that we as countries don't have to necessarily depend on possible consultancies, but also that we as countries can understand more and maybe ask questions that of certain parts of the process that we have questions on. And that would be all.
Thank you. Kazu from Japan, Minister of Environment, and thank you very much for today's event, which is quite very informative. And I, of course, share the very importance of the capacity building for implementing Article 6. For that, our government is also fully support for this kind of initiative. So thanks very much for this. We also organized a similar conference in terms of what is needed for the Article 6 implementation. And we also see the similar areas that is already identified. I think we really need to recognize that how to develop institutional arrangements is the first place to participate. So for this, I think sharing of experiences among the parties will be really important. And also, in order to participate, there is also a requirement in terms of recording and tracking. That is also one of the participation requirements. For that, I think there are several institutions and international organizations. They are supporting the infrastructure, such as registry, national registries. So I think we need to, maybe help in getting those support in terms of creating such registry. And also, of course, reporting is another issue: initial report, annual report, and regular report. So those are the things that after participating in Article 6, there is a requirement. So I can see that different stages of the needs for the capacity building. So probably we need to kind of sequencing those depending on the stage of the parties that they are preparing for it. And of course, there is support for the Article 6.4, and we are hoping that 6.4 will be soon to be up and running. But I think that will be maybe after we have Operation 6.4, we can think about the baseline support, development projects, and so on. So again, I think sequencing on these will be very important. And just the final key point is my message to everyone is I think in order to implement capacity building, of course, Secretariat will play an important role, but at the same time, we need to gather all the relevant institutions, parties, private sectors to make this capacity building to be more faster and also more effective, depending on the country's needs. So for this, we think some kind of coordinations, maybe organized by Secretariat or RCCs, will be very important. So we look forward to seeing those work to be done towards COP27. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. We'll take a few more questions, but we need to close. I believe Canada raised his hand earlier in the front row. And then apologies, colleagues, but we will have to close the event after this question, but there will be opportunities for further communication. This is not a one-time event. There will be a lot of opportunities to collect capacity building, and please approach us bilaterally, and then we will communicate with you the different channels. Yes.
Thank you, Mary. We are running out of time, but we will put in the CEO's site connected to this side event additional instructions of where you can provide further inputs. And of course, we will take note of your feedback, and we'll produce a note that we can follow up. So please feel free to outreach, and you will find the email where you can provide further inputs or questions over the CEO system. Thank you so much, and I'd like to invite James. There is another question. Yeah.
Well, sorry for running over. I just wanted to thank as well everyone here. And there's several of you who have already been in discussions with me on capacity building, so you know who you are, and I thank you. But to follow up with the point made by Martin, any countries who find themselves in a position to provide assistance, whether it be financial assistance or assistance in terms of activities that are underway, we are putting ourselves in this position to help with the coordination. And to follow up by the point made with Kazu, I'm actually in the process during these SBs meeting with those other organizations that are doing things to do exactly as that, to play this coordinating role, to make sure that the developing countries have the support they need wherever it can come from in a coordinated and facilitated way. So I'll stop at that, but really please take Carlos's heed and contact us, let us know what we can do on both the recipient and donor side. Thank you.
Thank you, James. If you can please remain seated, we still have closing remarks. That's it?
No closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. When you have two buses on the right and left, it's fantastic. But they did it last time. This kind of thing. Masamba was supposed to do the closing remarks. Very good, congratulations, excellent. Very good. There's so many people inside.